read today from Acts chapter 26. This is a little passage about the Apostle Paul. And as you know from his story in the book of Acts, he was originally, of course, not Paul, he was Saul, and he was a persecutor of the Christians. But then Jesus intervened, and Jesus can do that. He can intervene. He can just bust right through and intervene. He doesn't need anybody's permission. And I'm sure for the Christians at that time, when this guy Saul, he was very enthusiastic and persecuting them, and they were afraid of him. You could tell that they were afraid because of what happened afterwards. And it looked like a pretty bad situation, but Jesus could just turn it around. And he did. He appeared to Saul, as we know. We know this story real well. We've heard it over and over again. And so his life changed, and he, instead of being a persecutor, as it says, that they were all amazed that the one who was persecuting is now proclaiming the same Christ that Janet was talking about a while ago. That became his message. Whereas he was persecuting, now he's proclaiming. And it was a remarkable situation. You read about that, I think it's in Acts chapter 8, and then a little later on, Paul tells it again. And here in Acts chapter 26, at this point, he's been arrested and sent to Rome because he appealed to Caesar, and he tells it again. So that story is 3 times told in the book of Acts. Once the author tells us the story, and then twice Paul recounts it. And each time, the details, there are more or fewer depending on which time you're reading. And I think this one in Acts chapter 26 has the most details. And I think it's really interesting what Jesus said to Saul, who later became Paul, who once was a persecutor, now a proclaimer of Christ, the commission that he gave him, and what how it opened his eyes to a reality that he didn't formerly see. And this is in Acts chapter 26, and he's appearing before Agrippa, and I think there's a guy named Felix there. But anyway, Agrippa's the king, and so he's talking here, and I'm just not going to read the whole thing, but in the middle of it, in verse 13, he says, at midday, this is Acts 26:13, at midday, O king, I saw in the way a light from heaven. And I know this is something he literally saw. I mean, I think he means a literally bright light. But metaphorically speaking, he's also going to get some insight. He's going to see things differently from heaven. He said, it was above the brightness of the sun, shining round about me and them that journeyed with me. And when we were all fallen to the earth, so bright was this light and so powerful was this, that they all fell to the earth. They couldn't stand in the presence of this brightness of the glory of Christ as he appeared to him. And fallen to the earth, he said, I heard a voice speaking to me and saying in the Hebrew tongue, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? It is hard for thee to kick against the pricks. In other words, it's hard for you, to go against. This gives you some insight, and Jesus recognized that, Paul was finding it hard to go against. What he means by that is you're kind of swimming upstream. He's implying that what you're doing is wrong, and you're coming against it. And he said it's hard for you, which I'm sure Paul or Saul recognized that, but that's what he means by that. And verse 15, he said that he answered and said, who art thou, Lord? He said, I'm Jesus, whom thou persecutest. And I always just imagine, first thought that ran through his mind is like, uh-oh, whoops, he didn't expect that. But he said, I'm Jesus. I'm the one that you're kicking against, you're persecuting, you're coming against me. But he says in verse 16, but rise and stand upon thy feet, for I have appeared unto thee for this purpose. In other words, this is not just a random event, there's a purpose behind it. And here's the purpose: to make thee a minister and a witness both of the things which thou hast seen, that meaning right now, and of those things in the which I will appear unto thee. So he's saying you're going to be a witness of and tell about what you're seeing right now and experiencing, and I am going to in the future appear to you again. Then he adds, verse 17, delivering thee from the people and from the Gentiles, unto whom I now send thee. Now, Gentiles are not Jews. In other words, Paul's Jewish. He was a Pharisee, he tells us later, a very strict observer of the law. And the church, the early church, was 100% Jewish. All of Jesus' disciples in the Gospels are Jewish. Jesus was Jewish. He was the last prophet sent to the nation of Israel. He was their last chance. He says that himself. And now the proclamation is broader. Now there's a broader outlook. He's not excluding Jews. Paul's one. But he's drawing the circle wider, including everyone, and the Gentiles. That's you and me, people who would have been outsiders under the Old Testament. So he says to him, first of all, I'm sending you to the outsiders, to the Gentiles. And we can all say, thank you very much, because that includes all of us. And here's what he sent him to do in verse 18. To open their eyes. Now this is spiritually speaking, metaphorically speaking. He means to give them understanding, to see something, to understand something, and to turn them from darkness to light, and from the power of Satan unto God. Here's the crux of it, that they may receive forgiveness of sins. And notice the wording there. I think this is really good. Not that I might forgive them, but that they may receive forgiveness of sins. As far as he's concerned, the forgiveness of sins has already been accomplished, just like Janet was talking about a while ago in Isaiah chapter 53. By his stripes we were healed. All the things that, all of God's benefits, forgiveness, healing, restoration to favor, all of those things are a done deal now. And so he doesn't say that I might forgive them, but that they may receive forgiveness. The forgiveness is already accomplished and already offered freely. And so he says, you are going to open their eyes or help them see and understand that they may receive, in other words, what I've already done for them, receive forgiveness of sins. And he didn't stop there. That wasn't all. That wasn't the end. There's no period there. There's a comma. And then there's an and. It's not just receive forgiveness of sins, but there's something more. And inheritance. Inheritance means, well, you know what it means. I don't need to tell you what inheritance means. When someone dies and leaves you what they had worked for and they have earned, that's an inheritance. And you didn't work for it, they worked for it. You didn't earn it, they earned it. And when they die, if you're an inheritor, you inherit what they worked for. Jesus is saying, I have accomplished something. I have done something. I have earned. I have worked. And everyone that you preach to, everyone is going to be the beneficiary. And he says, I want you to open their eyes so that they, the ones you preach to, the ones he's sending him to with this commission, may receive forgiveness of sins. That's first. And, we might say all of the blessings, all of the favor of God, all of the entire package of everything that God has, everything that you need, and everything that Jesus has accomplished on our behalf, he wants everyone to receive it. He doesn't say that I might take a liking to him and I might give him a little dose or a little dab, here and there, or maybe not. No, he doesn't say it like that at all. He says, I want you to open their eyes that they may receive it. And that's what he's saying to him. Forgiveness and inheritance. And he says, just so it's clear, among them which are sanctified means made holy. Notice what he says. He doesn't say those that are sanctified by their strict lives and their self-sacrificing lives, No, sanctified by their faith that is in me. In other words, all of this is not contingent on you earning it or working for it or deserving it or being worthy. Just one thing, by your faith that is in me. Faith that is in Him procures for us the forgiveness that He procured on the cross. It gives it to us. And the inheritance. That means all of God's blessings, and He doesn't even specify. He just lumps all of God's favor and all of God's blessings together into this little word, inheritance, among them that are sanctified by faith that is in me. So there's a lot, packed in these little words here. And, we don't know how many times Jesus appeared to Paul in between when this happened. This is the first one. And when he began to, go and minister and go and preach, and he went and started all these churches and, all through the then Roman Empire. And we have letters to the churches that he started. And he is delivering to them, he's speaking to them, he's writing to them out of the revelation that he got from Jesus. And you can tell from what he writes that everything he says is colored by or saturated with this great revelation that Jesus has already accomplished and done something. For instance, I want you to notice how he phrases, how he draws their focus to the central thing that's centrally important. Like in 1 Corinthians, for instance. I'm going to read a little bit here. This is a letter to the Corinthians, the first one. And if you read this letter to the Corinthians, you find out they had a lot of issues. They had a lot of things going on. The church was fighting with one another. In a polite way, we might say, well, there's some divisions in the church. It sounds like there was just short of a fist fight going on. They were divided into factions. They were arguing. They were fussing. This is the church to which to whom he wrote the great love chapter. Why do you think he wrote that to them? Seriously, this is where chapter 13 or the love chapter. Well, he's dealing with them, but I think it's interesting how he narrows the focus to what's important here in this first chapter. And I'm not going to read the whole thing, but just enough to make the point. Verse 17, for Christ sent me not to baptize. Well, we need to get the context. That's back up to verse 13. Sorry about that, Torrin. I'm going to make Torrin jump all around. Verse 13, he's discussing these divisions. He says, is Christ divided? Well, no, of course not. Was Paul crucified for you? No. Were you baptized in the name of Paul? He's speaking rhetorically. He's just trying to attract their attention to the fact that, no, I didn't baptize you in the name of Paul. Verse 14, then he says, I thank God that I baptized none of you, but Crispus and Gaius. In other words, he's not speaking against baptism, but he's just saying, in verse 14, don't think that I baptized you into the religion of Paul. It's about Christ, you see. I baptized you in the name of Christ. And he says, kind of sarcastic. He says, I'm just glad I didn't baptize any of you except for these two, Crispus and Gaius. Verse 15, lest any should say that I had baptized in mine own name. And then he's like thinking in verse 16, oh yeah, I remember this bunch here. I baptized also the household of Stephanus. He's coming to, oh yeah, I remember them. You know what this tells me? This tells me that Paul wasn't sitting there with a pen writing this down. He's speaking this out, and somebody else is transcribing it. He's, oh yeah, I remember, household of Stephanus. Besides, I know not whether I baptized. He's like saying, there might be others, maybe I don't remember. But anyway, so that's the context. Verse 17, for Christ sent me not to baptize. By the way, don't ever tell this to churches who put all the emphasis on baptism. Don't ever read this one to them. April was raised in a church like that, and she just reminded me of this over the weekend. See, her parents were kind of strict, and I think that's good. Thank God for that, And they would only let her go out once a week when we were dating in high school. And so I used to go to church with her because that was an extra date, if you can call that a date. But anyway, so I found out a little bit about the doctrines, but they put a lot of emphasis on baptism. Not much on faith, but a lot on baptism. As long as you get in the water, get wet, then everything's all right. But this was not their favorite scripture. I guarantee you they didn't put this on a banner because he said, Paul says, Christ sent me not to baptize. That kind of creates a problem for their theology, I guess. But listen what's important here. But to preach the gospel, not with the wisdom of words, lest the cross of Christ should be made of none effect. He's saying, not with fancy words, not with fancy arguments. The main point is the cross. Something happened there that I don't want you to lose your focus, as he's saying. I don't want to dilute it by making it seem like anything else is of equal importance. Something happened at the cross. Lest the cross of Christ should be made of none effect, or its power minimized, in other words. Then he mentions it again in verse 18. For the preaching of the cross. This is the second time now he's mentioned the cross in chapter 1. For the preaching of the cross is to them that perish foolishness, but to us which are saved, it is the power of God. The cross is the power of God. The preaching of the cross. You know, he said this to the Romans too. He said, let's see if I can quote it. I'll just turn and read it to you. Torn, you don't have to turn. I'm just going to read it. When he wrote to the Romans, he said, I'm not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, for it is the power of God. And here he says, the preaching of the cross is the power of God. That's an interesting little statement, isn't it? The preaching. How is it that the preaching of the cross is the power of God? You ever thought about that? Because it brings the listener, at least the believing listener, it brings you into contact with the very crux of how God's blessings and favor and benefits and getting it done, getting everything done that you need done, it brings you right into contact with how it was done, where it was done. It was on the cross. Like Janet was talking about a while ago, where he was made to be sin for us, where he was wounded for our transgressions, where he was bruised for our iniquity. You know, I found out, by the way, those little truths, you know, we kind of take them for granted, but that's the power of God. Those truths are the power of God. And those truths make an impact. You know, you might not think so, but they do. That's why Paul's saying, I don't want to minimize that. I know you've all heard all of my little stories. Marianne hadn't heard all my stories, but okay. But this one comes to mind. I got a call. I get lots of calls. I got a call from a man who didn't live in this town, who lived in another town, and I didn't really know this guy. I'd crossed paths with him. I could visualize his face, but I didn't know him. And he asked me, I guess he knew we had church, evidently, because he called me and asked, he said, would you come and minister to my demon-possessed son? And my first thought when he said that was, I think you got the wrong number. But I didn't say that. I didn't want to have anything, that scared me. I'll just be honest with you. That alarmed me, because I was picturing some movie, you know. I thought somebody crawling across the ceiling, you know, and his fangs and long hair. And, you know, I was scared. That alarmed me. I'll just be honest. I didn't want to, but I said, you know, oh, sure, of course. Just one of the many services we offer. No, I didn't say that. I said, well, I was on the spot. I didn't know what to say. I didn't want to do it, but I thought, well, yeah, I didn't know what I was getting into, but yeah, okay. So we set a date. And again, he was in another town. And I was kind of nervous about it. I'll just be honest with you. And that's all he said, my demon-possessed son. And I didn't know what to expect. And so as the day drew nearer, I was thinking to myself, on this day, before I get in the car to drive to this town, I'm going to fast and pray and, you know, do all the Christian things we do to think we're going to empower ourselves, you know. Did you notice Paul, now I'm not saying anything bad about anything, but did you notice Paul, when he talked about the power of God, he didn't say fasting and prayer is the power of God. He didn't say your Bible reading is the power of God. He said the gospel of the cross, the preaching of the cross is the power of God. Let me just check. Okay, yeah. The preaching of the cross is to them that perish foolishness, but unto us which are saved, the preaching of the cross is the power of God. Now, I'm not minimizing anything else, but see, I had in my mind, you know, what we all do as Christians, you know, and I thought I'm going to get all prepared and, you know, get all spiritually muscled up, and you know, on that day, I'm not going to do anything but read my Bible and pray. That's what I thought to myself. But you know what happened? This is kind of funny. On that day, some relatives came over. He came to the door unexpectedly, knocked on the door and came in, and just I wasted the whole morning talking about nothing with these relatives, just about trivial stuff. And I'm thinking to myself, y'all don't understand. I got to go minister to a demon-possessed son. Get out of here. That's what I'm thinking to myself. But so I didn't have time. And then when I got to my car, I finally had to excuse myself and leave. And so I drove to this other town. And I'm thinking, oh, I've blown it now. I don't know what to do. I've got to go face this demon-possessed son. And I didn't have time to pray, or I didn't even open the Bible once. So I go to the house and I go to the address, and in my mind, it's like I'm almost picturing music like a horror movie. There's this tense. I'm feeling everything looked creepy. Even the bushes look creepy and all look scary. And there's two big shrubs on the side of the house. I'm thinking somebody's going to be behind. I'm scared. I'm kind of nervous. I know I shouldn't be, but and I didn't know how to deal with it or what to do, what I was going to expect. So I go knock on the door, and the man that called me opened the door. And I kind of looked around the corner because I thought, is he going to jump out and grab me? And I said, is your son here? He says, oh, no, he's at work. I said, at work? Where do demon-possessed people work, And usually, yeah, right. Yeah, right, I know. Usually at this point I make some joke about Walmart or McDonald's or something. But no, I'm not going to say that. But anyway, he said he's at work, and I thought, at work? How is it the demon-possessed guy can go to work? But anyway, there were two chairs sitting in the middle of the living room. So I sat down on one of them and was just waiting. And finally, after a little while, the door opened, and this young man came in, and he looked clean-cut and nice and dressed nice, and just not what I was expecting at all. Just a ordinary-looking kid, just a nice, clean-cut looking kid. And he came and sat down, and so I just began to talk to him, and and finally he, to get around to what this was all about. Well, he had gotten involved with the occult. He had gotten involved with, I'm not sure how it all. I don't remember how it all happened, but he had gotten involved with some sort of occult things, and I don't remember all the details. But he was telling me all these things, and he said, and I started hearing voices, and he said, I was raised in church, but I went away from God, and I went away from church and got involved with all these bad things. And I was trying to think to myself, well, what am I going to do about, how am I going to respond? And it's funny, when he stopped and took a breath and paused for a minute, just what came out of my mouth, what came to my mind, what I said to him was, all these things you're telling me, I don't want to minimize the seriousness of it to you, but I just want you to know something, that before you were ever born, before you ever got involved with these things you just told me about, Jesus knew ahead of time that this was going to happen. He foresaw in your life. See, he said he was raised in church. He said, I was a Christian. He put it in the past tense. He said, Jesus knew ahead of time. And I quoted to him. In fact, I turned and read it. I didn't just quote it from Isaiah chapter 53. It said, he was wounded for our transgressions. I said, Jesus was already wounded for this is your transgressions you're telling me about. Jesus was wounded for your transgressions. He was bruised. So you're telling me about your iniquities. I want you to know that Jesus knew ahead of time, and he was bruised for your iniquities. And the chastisement that you deserve was on him. He said, yeah, but you don't know there's more. So he told me some more. And then when he stopped again, I said it again. Yes, but Jesus knew ahead of time, and he was wounded for these transgressions. He was bruised for your iniquities, and the chastisement of your peace, as Isaiah says, the chastisement that you deserved that has taken away your peace, it was on him. And so he said, yeah, but you don't know, there's more. And we went back and forth like this, and I'm not joking about this, because when I got ready to leave, I saw how long it had been. 45 minutes, and I'm not exaggerating that at all. 45 minutes we sat there going back and forth, and him telling me about, hearing voices and all the different things he did, and this and that and the other thing. And again, not to minimize the seriousness of that, but I answered him every single time with Isaiah chapter 53 about the cross, about what Jesus did. But Jesus was wounded for those transgressions and bruised for your iniquities. You know what? After a while, after 45 minutes of that, and I don't know how many times I had quoted Isaiah 53 again and again and again and again. Suddenly he just stopped and he didn't respond anymore. He just sat there for a minute and he began to cry. And he began to just tears rolling down his face. And he said, I thought I'd gone too far. I thought I'd done too much. I thought I could never come back again. That was the thought that was in his mind. And I discovered on that day something I had not really realized until that experience, not knowing what else to say, not knowing what else to do. What I discovered was the preaching of the cross is the power of God. I brought him in contact with the power of God, not on purpose. I didn't know what I was doing. That's the only thing I could think of to say. But the preaching of the cross, about Jesus, how he was wounded for our transgressions, how he was bruised for our iniquity. The chastisement of our peace was on him, and by his stripes we're healed, physically, emotionally, free from demons, if that's the case. Whatever it is that we need, the power of God is activated by the preaching of the cross and preaching of Christ. And that was a real revelation to me. I had never considered how powerful it really was, because that's the answer for everything. That's the answer for, as we were talking about earlier, for physical sickness. That's the answer for guilt. That's the answer for anxiety and worry, and that's the answer for, here's the way Paul said it, he that spared not his own son, but delivered him up for us all, how shall he not with him also freely give us all things? Meaning everything else comes under that. So if he did this for us, everything else is pales into insignificance compared to, it's almost like in God's mind. See, this is the revelation that Paul got, that I think he had a hard time putting it into words, but he's constantly trying in his epistles. It's almost like it opened the floodgates of God's blessings for us. It just opened it up, and it's like God had this big bucket that says blessings and favor. He just turned it upside down on top of us. And if we would just understand that it's all given to us freely. He says, the preaching of the cross is to them that perish foolishness, but to us that are saved, it's the power of God. I'm going to go on reading a little bit. For it is written, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise and bring to nothing the understanding of the prudent. Where is the wise? Where is the scribe? Where is the disputer of this world? Hath not God made foolish the wisdom of this world? And after that, in the wisdom of God, the world by wisdom knew not God. It pleased God by the foolishness of preaching to save them that believe. Paul's kind of sarcastic in this. He said, the world thinks they're really smart. Well, God shows how much smarter he is, that he saves us not by things that appear to the world to be wise and like philosophers and so forth, but by the foolishness of preaching to save them that believe. The Jews require a sign. He knows because he's one of them. He knows how they think. The Greeks seek after wisdom. He knows because he's hung around the Greeks and their love of philosophy and so forth. But instead of all those things, but we preach Christ crucified. Now I've been numbering these. This is the third time he's brought it up. Third time he's mentioned the cross. Here's what we preach: Christ crucified. Unto the Jews a stumbling block, unto the Greeks foolishness. The Jews are offended by it. The Greeks think it's foolishness, the Gentiles that is. But unto them which are called, both Jews and Greek, Christ, listen, the power of God, the wisdom of God. This is the second time now he said that this preaching of Christ and the cross is the power of God. It brings you smack dab in contact with the power of God. Because the foolishness of God is wiser than men, and the weakness of God is stronger than men. For you see your calling, brethren, how that not many wise men after the flesh, not many mighty, not many noble are called. But God hath chosen the foolish things of this world to confound the wise. And God hath chosen the weak things of the world to confound the things which are mighty. And the base things of the world, and things which are despised hath God chosen, yea, and things which are not, to bring to naught things that are, that no flesh should glory in his presence. But of him, that is to say, by him or through him, by his action, are you in Christ Jesus, who, that meaning Christ, of God, is made unto us wisdom, and righteousness and sanctification and redemption. Christ has made to us all of those things. We don't make ourselves those things. We don't acquire those things. He made Christ to be those things for us. We are blessed with His wisdom. We are made righteous with the righteousness of Christ. We are sanctified, that is to say, made holy. We're redeemed. And it's all by His action in Christ. Verse 31 says, that according as it is written, he that glorieth, let him glory in the Lord. Now, Paul didn't write this in chapters, didn't put verses, so he's just going on. Chapter 2 is a continuation of what he's saying. He said, and I, brethren, when I came to you, came not with excellency of speech or of wisdom, declaring unto you the testimony of God. Listen to verse 2. For I determined not to know anything among you, save Christ Jesus and Him crucified. Now, if you're counting, that's the fourth time he's brought up the cross and Jesus Christ and Him crucified. And I think this is remarkable, what he says here. I determined not to know anything among you, save Christ and Him crucified. That's a funny little turn of phrase, isn't it? That's like saying, I made a determination when I was with you, the only thing we're going to talk about is Christ and Him crucified. It's almost like Paul knows that this is a message that has power in it. And he knows that these Corinthians, he says later they're carnal, and they're fighting. And he says, you're going to need a lot of the power of God. So I'm just going to press you up against the power of God. And we're not going to talk about anything except Christ and Him crucified. And sooner or later it's going to get through to you and it's going to fix whatever's wrong. I almost think that's kind of Paul's attitude about it. Why do you think he's bringing it up in this letter again and again and again and again? He says, I just want you to remember. Remember when I was with you, he said, the only thing I had to preach was Christ and Him crucified. I'm sure he preached it on Sunday morning. Then when they came back on Sunday night, what's the message tonight, Paul? Well, it's Christ and Him crucified. Oh, again? Yes. There's more to say about it. It's a never-ending subject. Well, I think that's all we got today. Let's all stand up. And I think it's the answer for what we need.